r/NoSleep. Posted by u/Joshua Andrew 1985. I'm a sleep researcher and I recently came across a whole town that was suffering from nightmares. It's a fascinating case. Unfortunately, it's also getting increasingly harder to discuss with my colleagues. The government is shutting down my lab and confiscating all my work just to be safe. I'm posting everything that I can remember while it is fresh in my mind, otherwise the details will eventually be lost to time and space. At least, that's the best case scenario. God help us all if the government actually plans on using the information they've gained. Either way, the nightmares may have started with one young woman named Bella Tomlinson. Her medical history showed she suffered from disturbing nightmares at least as early as age 6. So, I know they weren't quite as bad as the rest of the towns would get, seeing as how those could drive everyone to insanity or suicide within a few weeks. But Bella lived with them for 10 years before she was brutally murdered at age 16. When my team arrived to investigate, Rockfall, Kentucky had already been quarantined for a week. We had only been brought in with the FBI after the regular police and CDC failed to make much headway. The locals had the hypothesis that Bella was haunting them all from beyond the grave and the nightmares would only stop once her killer was found. The CDC initially suspected something more mundane was infecting the townfolk, especially when the first responders started to have their own nightmares. However, tests showed nothing unusual in the water, food, or air. And simply removing a resident from Rockfall ended their nightmares. Unfortunately, concerns about a contagious cause kept us from realizing that for a lethally long time. The town used to have a population of 5,120. About 300 committed suicide by the time we got there. Another 40 had died of heart attacks. And about 40 more had been murdered by their friends and family. We enacted policies, like curfews, that slowed the rate of destruction, but only 3,000 survived long enough before we realized we could simply move them to hospitals in nearby towns. Once a mile or so from Rockfall's borders, the patients would immediately feel better. Their first sleep afterwards was usually dreamless before more normal patterns would resume. To protect ourselves, we investigators took medication that suppressed the need for sleep. Unfortunately, our bodies gradually built up a resistance to the pills, so we needed to work as quickly as we could. The last thing we needed was risking insanity ourselves. And then there were the ritualistic murders. Bella was the first, but 9 others had followed. The killings were spread out over the town with none of the victims having anything in common. The MO was identical though, so much so that the police were 100% certain there was just one serial killer. Aaron Bradley was the first to confess. He was Bella's boyfriend and the cops took him at his word at first. But he had been locked up for 3 days when the next murder occurred. Many others would also confess, but all would be ruled out for various reasons, such as solid alibis. It was an interesting mystery, but that's for the FBI now. I was only there for the dreams. When I was being recruited, I heard of a man who had been dreaming about being lost in the jungle. Everywhere he turned, another dangerous creature would start to chase him. Another person dreamed of endlessly regurgitating razor blades. Another found herself as a child again and lost in mall, amidst a sea of faceless, uncaring adults. These weren't unusual nightmares, at least not for their subject material. However, everyone complained of how realistic the dreams felt. How painful. And how endless. The man in the jungle felt himself torn apart by monkeys, jaguars, birds, and even animals not normally seen in the jungle like lions. But every time he died, he just appeared in another part of the jungle and the chase would start up again. To him and the others, they felt every second of every hour they were asleep. Some even experienced days and weeks passing. No one seemed to be able to wake from these horrible dreams by themselves. Instead, alarms or another person would need to wake them. Otherwise, they'd remain tormented in a kind of coma. Even more worrisome, the dreams seemed to swap around. For example, multiple people reported the jungle dream but never on the same night. They all described it in precisely the same way, even the order that new animals were introduced was the same. The town first declared an emergency after a teacher fell asleep in his classroom. The nightmares had gone on for a few days at this point, but everyone assumed they'd pass without much harm. This teacher had decided not to go to sleep the night before. This led to him accidentally taking a nap in class, and his students filmed him with their phones right before waking him for a prank. Thankfully, the principal had the sound mind to confiscate all the phones soon after the incident. Both to limit the public panic and because I got to watch what happened from multiple angles. After the kids prodded him, the teacher just screamed at first. It was almost like he had forgotten to open his eyes as he began to flail around with all his limbs. His coordination was completely off and it was like each limb had its own mind. Eventually his eyes opened, but looking around the room just seemed to cause him pain. His screams intensified, especially as his searching hands finally found his face and began to claw away. He would die of a heart attack later, but not before managing to pull out both eyes and skin most of his face. What kind of nightmare could do that to a man? What could he possibly have been dreaming about? I still wish I could have seen it myself, even knowing what it did to that poor man. After witnessing that, I was determined to get to the bottom of this mystery. What exactly was causing the nightmares? How could the victims share their dreams? And why was there a clear geographic boundary to the dreams? I had plenty of subjects to interview, but the most interesting ones were the sleeping beauties. So called because they had been put into medically induced comas. For some strange reason, they were unable to leave the town. They would react with increasing pain the closer they got to the Rockfall's borders. There were 12 of them, but 2 actually died of sudden multiple organ failure once they were moved too far. So it was easier to put the rest into a dreamless sleep and keep them in place. Not coincidentally, they were also the prime suspects for the serial killer. They were the only ones alive but unaccounted for when the last murder had happened. So, a research lab was built in the center of town. We woke them one by one to interview them and try and interpret what they remembered of their nightmares. Unlike the others, they had the same nightmare every time. Their words haunt me to this day, but I will try to record them for posterity. However, I'll have to take a break for now. My health isn't what it used to be and I find myself quite tired now. When I feel up to it, I'll record the nightmare of David Chambers, the wedding photographer. It's definitely not for the faint of heart, but he had crucial information to share about the rest of the town. Until then, above all else, stay safe. Very respectfully, Dr. William Abbott, MD, PhD. The next story of this video. Posted by you/Joshua Andrew 1985. Everyone around me is coming down with the same mysterious disease. It started with my mother. It actually took a long time for either of us to notice. She just kept being startled everywhere. I'd walk into the kitchen, in full view of her, and then give her a hug. She would scream as though I had just sneaked up on her. Whenever I tried to tell her that something was wrong, she just couldn't see it. Also, she had always been a good driver, but all of a sudden, she was getting into minor fender benders left and right, especially in parking lots. She was fine in our own home, usually, so I experimented. When I closed doors she expected to be open, she ran into them. When I moved furniture around, she would trip over them. After some research, I tried to break the news to my mom that she was losing her vision. But my mom absolutely rejected that possibility. She denied anything was wrong. Finally, I got her to agree to visit our doctor. He confirmed she was indeed going blind, but not in the way I thought. My mother suffered from Anton Babinski syndrome. Her eyesight was getting worse, but she was still getting visual information from her brain. It was filling in the blanks with information it expected or had known before. That's why she did best at home. At least, that's what Dr. McKay theorized. He said this was an incredibly rare condition and not much was known about it. He suspected that my mom had a stroke and the Anton Babinski was caused by resulting brain damage. As scary as all this sounded, my mom remained upbeat. She continued to deny being blind but was happy to listen to the doctor's orders to stay home. I did all the driving for her from then on. Of course I was and am resentful. I'm still in high school, but I have to go home every day to take care of my mom when she should be taking care of me. Worse, she was oblivious about how much I needed her and how much she relied on me. I tried talking to her about everything, but then whatever happened to her got worse. She started losing her hearing. I have to tell her things again and again. She wouldn't turn to me until I was practically shouting her name. And when I did tell her what was going on, she denied anything was wrong. Dr. McKay was stumped when I visited him the next time. It wasn't unheard of for brain damage to cause hearing loss, but the delayed reaction was unusual. All he could think of was there was some disease causing everything. More tests would have to be done, but my mom wouldn't consent to anything. Her loss of senses made her increasingly hard to take care of. She finally became totally blind while I felt totally lost myself. I started hurting myself then. When I had to go to Dr. McKay for my own checkup, he didn't notice my fresh bruises and latest scars. He said I was in perfect health. He also ran into his own office door. I asked him if he was having any vision problems, but he denied anything was wrong. Then I noticed that everyone around me started to have trouble seeing. Then hearing. My friends, my teachers, other family members. It seemed like everyone started living in their own little bubbles. Yet, Everyone was content. Not the happiest I had ever seen them, but happy enough to just sit around. Through not seeing, not hearing, they were able to attain a certain level of bliss through ignorance. I wish I knew what caused this disease, because I really want to catch it myself. I'd love to be content, even if just for a day. But even though it seems to be centered around me, my vision and hearing remain perfect. Unfortunately, the only people who seem to be completely unaffected are myself and my stepdad. To this day, my mom denies he's doing anything wrong.